Hey, welcome back to B5 Machine Restorations, and today we're taking on a 2017 Toyota Camry. I'm going to replace all four of the brakes, or the brake pads on all four wheels rather. And so I'm putting the car up on jack stands, and then today's video we're just going to focus on the rear brakes, and then in next week's video we'll replace the front brakes. I'm going ahead and taking all the wheels off, and I'm using an impact driver to take the wheels off. I don't typically use an impact driver to put them back on, and we'll get into that when we actually put the wheels back on. But I want to get all four wheels off and out of the way so that I can access the brake calipers. Once we get to the brake calipers, then we can take the calipers off and remove the pads and then replace the pads. And we'll also, when we do our work today, we're going to check the thickness of the rotor, and we'll talk about why we would not want to change the rotor or have them turned at an auto parts store. And we'll get into all that detail as we get started. With the wheels off, I now have access to the brake calipers. And as you saw in the previous picture, there are 4 bolts. Actually, we're going to focus on the outer two, the 2 that are easiest to get to, and those will loosen and allow us to remove the actual caliper that squeezes the brake pads against the rotor. I suspect that these rotors on this car are fine, and I'm not going to have to either change them or turn them. There's no shaking or shimmying when we brake, and my assumption is that these rotors are going to be in spec. We're actually going to measure them with the dial calipers to verify that. If I need to take the rotors off, then I'll loosen the other 2 bolts. So I'm using a 14mm wrench, and I'm going to loosen these bolts. There's just 2 to take off, and once you take those 2 off, you should be able to slide the caliper off of the brake pads, and then we want to squeeze or press the caliper back to its original position. And keep in mind, it would have squeezed over time and reduced the amount of thickness that was available. And of course, these pads you can see are worn down. The new pads will be thicker, and so we need all the room we can get. So I'm going to pull these pads off. They have metal backing plates on them, and they also have a wear indicator that snaps onto the steel part of the pad. Once I get these off, I can take those metal plates off. Now, the new brake pads that you get from the auto parts store may or may not have the steel pads. I've moved over now to the driver's side rear wheel and just repeating the process. So again, we're going to take off the 2 outer caliper bolts to access the brake pads. And I'm not interested in taking the main caliper housing off. So once we get the calipers off, I take a wire and I wire up the caliper out of the way while I compress it back to its original state. And that way it doesn't put strain on the brake line. Because once you take the caliper off right here, the only thing holding it will be the brake line. And so again, we'll take a steel cable or steel wire and just run it through one of the holes and loop it up on the spring, and that way it holds it out of the way and doesn't put strain on the brake cable. Again, we're pulling the pads off, and I'm just using gentle pressure. You should not need to force these. You might be able to grab them just with your fingers, but it doesn't take much at all to pull these off. And here now I'm checking the thickness of the rotor. So your service manual for your vehicle should, or you probably can Google it as well, should tell you the minimum thickness of the rotors and the thickness of the rotors while they're in spec. Now it turns out that these rotors are at the top of their thickness, so they haven't worn down at all, it would seem. And again, there's no wobbling or anything like that. So I'm gonna clean these parts here, the caliper, to get ready to put my new brake pads on. And you saw in that picture just a minute ago the thickness of the new pads as compared to the old pads. And that's why we had to compress that caliper back in on itself to allow enough room. So I'm cleaning those steel plates off. And again, the plates may come in the box from your auto parts store. I'm reusing the old plates, and I'm putting on the new wear indicators that came with these new brake pads. And here I'm putting on the old plate. It's still in good condition, and that's not a wear part per se. It doesn't receive a lot of friction or wear, so it's a good stamped steel part. And then we can just put the shoes or the brake pads back in place inside that caliper housing. Now there's some springs that hold these in place that are part of the housing, and so you have to finagle it a little bit, and it helps to get under the vehicle sometimes to see. Whenever the pads are on properly, they should be square against the rotor. They shouldn't be at any odd angle or anything like that. They should be sitting squarely against the face of the rotor. And then you know you have them on properly. Now I can unwire the caliper that I had hanging up, and I can slip the caliper back over the two brake pads. Now there's a rubber boot back there on that hydraulic ram, and so we want to make sure that doesn't get pinched. And then we should be able to slide the caliper back on. And you may have to finagle and press the caliper housing right there, that other bolt. Remember, slack was in this system because the brakes had worn down over time, and so we need to put it all back to its widest part or widest distance. And once we do that, we can put these bolts back in, and we're going to tighten these bolts with a torque wrench to the specified torque. So what we're not going to do is just get a wrench and just tighten them down. We want to use the torque that the service manual calls for. Back on the driver's side, cleaning and then putting the new brake pads on. And again, you see how that slips in. There's resistance to putting it in, but it should go in smoothly and squarely against the face of the rotor. And then we'll unwire the caliper that's hanging up, and then we'll put the caliper on. And again, if you do not recompress the caliper, it will not go on. Now we'll thread in our bolts. And the next step is simply to get a torque wrench, and we'll torque these to the specified torque. There's typically a range, so I'm within that range that the service manual calls out. And here I'm using a torque wrench and also a crow's foot to get access to the bolt because of the brake line and some other things that were in the way. And we'll do that to both the upper and the lower. I don't know that there is a specified order. I've always assumed you could do it either upper or lower first. Now we need to bleed the brakes, so we're gonna hook up I had to use a 5/16 hose to the brake bleeder. You take the boot off, and this is a two-person job. You'll have someone in the vehicle, and you loosen the brake line, you have them press and hold the brake, and you can see brake fluid coming out, and I'm draining this into a Coke can, and then you tighten the bleeder back up before they release the brakes. That way you don't pull air back into the system.
Release.
So it's open the valve, press the brake and hold, close the valve, release the brake. Open the valve, press the brake and hold, close the valve and release the brake. And here you can see on this pump here, there's actually air bubbles right there that just came out of the brake line. We don't want air in our brake. It's a hydraulic system. Air compresses, hydraulic fluid does not. And so we want to get all the air out. So we pumped it again that time and there was no air. And that's all there is to it. We've just changed the rear brake pads on this 2017 Toyota Camry. If this is your first time to ever change brake pads, for the two wheels, you should allow for 2 or 3 hours to gather your tools and figure everything out. But it's fairly straightforward. If you don't have to turn the rotors or buy new rotors, of course that's going to add time if you have to do that. And you can get rotors from the auto parts store. They can also turn them if they're within spec. It's definitely cheaper to turn them. I think it's about $25 a rotor if you're going to turn them, and then they cost around $80 for this vehicle if I'm going to buy new ones. And anyway, it's a very straightforward process. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, and I look forward to next week when we do the front brakes.